I'm Sarah Miller, I'm 31, and I've worked night shifts as a nurse for 6 exhausting years, saving lives while quietly drowning in student debt. I thought my biggest struggle was paying off 70 grand in loans. Turns out it wasn't. At this year's family barbecue, under the string lights and rose garden smiles, I discovered the real betrayal. My little sister Chloe, the golden child, had been stealing my identity for years. Loans, credit cards, even the car she proudly drove, bought in my name. And that night, sitting in Grandma's study, I finally saw just how deep the lies ran. Before I tell you how I confronted them and what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you've ever been stabbed in the back by someone you love, hit like and subscribe. You're not alone, and neither was I. I've been a registered nurse at Evergreen Community Hospital, right here in Pine Ridge. I've worked night shifts, pulled countless hours of overtime, all just to chip away at the absolute mountain of student loans looming over me. $70,000 in debt doesn't just evaporate overnight, especially not on a nurse's salary in our small Pacific Northwest town. Every single month, I'd make my payment, sometimes agonizingly large, and watch that number decrease by what felt like microscopic pennies. It was a slow, grinding battle, but I was winning inch by painful inch. My credit score? Impeccable. I'd worked my tail off to make sure of it. My grandmother, Margaret, at a robust 80 years old, has always been the undisputed matriarch. She still presides over the sprawling, old money estate where my mom, Catherine, grew up. A place filled with antiques, history, and a certain unspoken expectation of decorum. She hosts every holiday, meticulously maintains her award-winning rose garden, and crucially, keeps meticulous track of everyone's business. Grandma inherited a substantial sum from my grandfather's insurance policy when he passed away about 15 years ago. On top of that, she owned 2 multi-family homes in town that generated a steady, reliable income. She wasn't exactly wealthy by national standards, but in our quaint little community, she was more than comfortable. Comfortable enough, in fact, to help family when needed, and she did help, selectively. Then there's my younger sister, Chloe. She's 25, 3 years my junior, and works as a marketing assistant for a local real estate company. Chloe has always been, and I say this without a hint of bitterness, just a simple statement of fact, the golden child, prettier, more social, and frankly, Grandma Margaret's undisputed favorite. Where I'm practical, reserved, and analytical, Chloe is spontaneous, charming, and effervescent. She majored in communications, breezing through college with minimal student debt because, you guessed it, Grandma Margaret covered most of her tuition. I remember vividly the day I asked Grandma Margaret for the same kind of help. I was in nursing school, buried under textbooks and the looming weight of my loans. I tentatively brought it up during a quiet Sunday dinner. Her response? "Sarah, you're smart and responsible. You'll figure it out." And so I did, through endless loans, through exhausting night shifts, through sacrificing every bit of my social life. I figured it out. This dynamic wasn't new. It was a thread woven through the very fabric of our childhood. Chloe received expensive dance lessons while I got library books. She got a brand new laptop for her high school graduation. I got a $100 gift card to a bookstore. Mom Catherine and Dad Robert tried their best to be fair, they really did. But their budget only stretched so far, and Grandma Margaret's selective, often glaring generosity created an imbalance they simply couldn't correct. My current car situation made this whole scenario, this public implosion, even more agonizingly painful. For the past 3 years, I'd been driving a beat-up 2008 Toyota Camry with something like 230,000 miles on it. It was a relic, a faithful old beast, but it constantly needed repairs. Last month, the engine finally gave out on the freeway, a spectacular, smoke-billowing death. The mechanic, a kindly man who'd been servicing it for years, just shook his head. "Sarah," he'd said, "fixing this would cost more than the car is worth." Since then, I'd been taking the bus to Evergreen Community Hospital. You can imagine the joy of a 20-minute bus ride at 6 a.m. after a 12-hour night shift. I'd been saving every single penny from every extra shift, every skipped takeout meal, every discount grocery run for a down payment on something, anything reliable. A used Subaru, a practical Honda, just something that wouldn't leave me stranded on the side of a Highway 101. No one in my family had offered to help. Not a single word. Not even Grandma Margaret, though she knew about my plight. I'd mentioned it to her just last week, in fact. Our annual family barbecue at Grandma Margaret's estate is a tradition going back decades. Everyone attends. My parents, Aunt Susan and Uncle David with cousin Emily, Arthur, plus various neighbors and friends who've become honorary family members over the years. Typically held in late June, when Grandma Margaret's famous rose garden is in its full vibrant bloom, it's an all-day affair. Think lawn games, far too much food, and inevitably, a healthy dose of family drama. This year's barbecue seemed perfectly normal at first. Mom Catherine was arranging her famous 3-bean salad on the picnic table. Dad Robert and Uncle David were already embroiled in their usual spirited argument about the proper marination for chicken. Aunt Susan was fussing over the precise placement of silverware, while my cousin Emily helped Grandma Margaret bring out pitchers of homemade lemonade. Arthur dozed peacefully in the shade, his straw hat pulled low over his eyes. The only person missing, fashionably late as always, was Chloe, who had texted her ETA just an hour before. I arrived early to help set up, hoping, foolishly perhaps, that my dedication would be noticed. I'd worked a 12-hour night shift that ended at 7 a.m., gone home to shower and change, then headed straight to Grandma's. Exhaustion pulled at my eyelids, a heavy, insistent weight, but I smiled through it, arranging chairs and carefully stringing lights around the patio. When Grandma Margaret had asked about my transportation troubles, a fleeting, almost casual inquiry, I'd mentioned I was close to having enough saved for a down payment on a reliable used vehicle. Public transportation is so unreliable, I'd said, trying to keep any hint of complaint, any trace of desperation from my voice. But I should have enough saved by the end of summer. Grandma Margaret had nodded thoughtfully, her gaze distant, but offered no comment, no assistance. It stung a little, yes, but I was used to it. I'd resigned myself to the grind. What I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have imagined, was that the real pain, the truly devastating emotional impact, was yet to come. I was still clinging to a sliver of hope. As everyone settled around the massive outdoor dining table, laden with barbecue and an overwhelming array of side dishes, I allowed myself a moment of fragile relaxation. The warm June air carried the comforting scent of grilled meat and freshly cut grass. Fireflies were just beginning to emerge, tiny flickering lanterns against the deepening twilight, and the string lights I'd hung earlier cast a warm golden glow over the entire gathering. Despite everything, despite the exhaustion, the financial struggle, the subtle sting of family dynamics, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the day. Maybe this would be when my hard work, my quiet perseverance, was finally recognized. Maybe this would be when my family truly saw me, not just Chloe's reserved older sister, but me, Sarah. Little did I know that in the next few minutes, everything I thought I understood about my family, about my own life, would be turned inside out, leaving me questioning relationships I had trusted, believed in, my entire life. My throat was still tight with humiliation, a burning ache that spread through my chest. The betrayal felt like a raw wound, exposed for everyone to see. I stood there, leaning against the rough bark of the old cedar tree, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could still hear the raised voices from the patio, a cacophony of confusion, anger, and mounting disbelief. My mother's desperate pleas for explanation, Dad Robert's low rumbling demands for answers, Chloe's increasingly frantic and confused protests, and then Grandma Margaret's sharp, authoritative commands, attempting to bring order to the chaos she herself had unwittingly unleashed. It was a symphony of implosion, and I was at its discordant center. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 15 minutes, I heard soft footsteps approaching. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned, half expecting Chloe to appear, perhaps with some elaborate last-ditch explanation, a desperate attempt to salvage her image. But it wasn't Chloe, it was my cousin, Emily. She moved with a quiet grace, her expression gentle and concerned. "Everyone's looking for you, Sarah," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper in the growing dusk. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold my shattered composure together, despite the warm evening air. "I can't go back there right now, Em," I replied, my voice hoarse. Emily nodded, her gaze understanding. "I don't blame you. That was intense." She paused, her eyes searching mine. "Did you know?" she asked, her voice cautious. "About the car, the loan, any of it?" I shook my head slowly, numbly. "Absolutely not," I said, my voice gaining a bit of a raw edge. "Nobody did. Except, apparently, Chloe and Grandma Margaret. Emily sighed, a small, troubled sound. But something's off, she mused. Her brow furrowed in thought. Grandma Margaret seems genuinely confused. And Chloe... Emily hesitated, choosing her words carefully. She's crying, Sarah, saying there's been a misunderstanding. But Sarah, she paused again, meeting my gaze directly, her voice dropping to a serious tone. You might want to check your credit report. And maybe your other financial accounts, too. My blood ran cold, a sudden, sharp chill that pierced through the lingering humiliation. You think she used my identity? The words felt foreign, alien, impossible. My own sister? Emily's expression was grim. I don't know, Sarah, but as a paralegal, I've seen cases like this before. Family members with access to personal information. It's unfortunately not uncommon. She trailed off, letting me fill in the horrifying blanks. My mind immediately flashed to moments, innocuous at the time, that now pulsed with an unsettling new meaning. Chloe asking to use my laptop last Christmas because hers was acting up. The week she'd stayed at my apartment after a messy breakup, with complete unfettered access to my mail and personal documents. The old joke she used to make about us looking enough alike to pass for twins, despite the 3-year age gap. A cold dread settled in my gut. Eventually, I composed myself enough to return to the gathering. The festive atmosphere had evaporated entirely. The patio, just moments ago filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and brittle. Small groups stood whispering tensely, their faces grim, their gazes darting nervously. Chloe was nowhere to be seen. My parents, Mom Catherine and Dad Robert, looked utterly shell-shocked, sitting side by side but not speaking, their hands clasped between them. The picture of bewildered grief. Grandma Margaret approached me immediately, her face drawn with concern, the usual formidable spark in her eyes replaced by genuine distress. Sarah, we need to get to the bottom of this, right now. I nodded numbly, the tremors still running through my body. I followed her inside, past the silent, watchful family, through the familiar, opulent living room, and into the hushed sanctuary of her study. It was here, in this room, that the real nightmare would begin to unfold. Grandma Margaret's study had always been off limits to us as children. The heavy, polished oak door was typically closed, a silent, imposing barrier. We understood implicitly that her financial records, her personal papers, her business dealings, all of it was fiercely private. Now, as I followed her into this forbidden sanctum, I felt a strange, unsettling detachment. It was as if I were watching someone else's life unravel, a character in a particularly dark movie, rather than my own. Sit, she commanded, her voice still brisk, but with an underlying tremor I hadn't heard before. She gestured to one of the leather-bound armchairs facing her massive antique desk. I complied silently, my movements stiff, my gaze fixed on her. I watched as she settled herself behind the desk, her expression a mix of bewilderment and steely resolve. She pulled out her reading glasses, their delicate frames a stark contrast to the gravity of the moment. First things first, she said, her voice a little rough. Do you have any banking apps on your phone? Anything where you might see active loans in your name? I nodded. Pulling out my smartphone, my hands still trembling slightly. I opened my credit monitoring app, a precaution I'd taken years ago after a major hospital data breach. I hadn't checked it in months, confident in the automatic notifications that would alert me to any changes. Except, there had been no notifications in my email, nothing flagging suspicious activity, no text alerts from my bank. An uneasy feeling began to crawl up my spine. Why had I not been alerted? I logged in, my fingers fumbling slightly, navigating to the active account section. And then, I froze. There it was, staring back at me from the bright screen. An auto loan from Pacific Shores Bank. Opened exactly 30 days ago for $20,000, with an $8,000 down payment listed, and $12,000 financed. The monthly payment was listed as $275,500 over 48 months. It's here, I whispered, my voice barely audible, raw with disbelief. I turned the phone, extending it across the wide expanse of the desk, so Grandma Margaret could see. A vehicle loan I never applied for. Grandma Margaret's lips thinned to a tight, grim line. Her eyes, magnified by her glasses, scanned the details on my phone screen. How is that possible? She asked. Her voice laced with growing horror. Wouldn't they need your signature, your identification? They would need my social security number, I said slowly, enunciating each word as the horrifying realization dawned, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. My date of birth, my home address, my employment history. My gaze drifted from the screen past Grandma Margaret to a blank spot on the wall. All information Chloe would have access to. Memories, once harmless and forgotten, began flooding back, now tainted with a sinister new meaning. Chloe asking to use my laptop last Christmas because hers was acting up, complaining about a virus. The time she stayed at my apartment for a solid week after a particularly nasty breakup, sprawling on my sofa, with complete unfettered access to my mail, my documents, even my locked bedroom when I was at work. The jokes she used to make about us looking enough alike to pass for twins, despite being 3 years apart in age. My mind reeled. It was all so chillingly clear now. I need to see what else is there, I muttered, my voice barely a whisper, scrolling through the app with increasing dread. My fingers flew across the screen, each tap a beat of rising panic. 2 new credit cards, both opened in the past 3 months, both nearly maxed out. One for designer clothing, another for what looked like online luxury purchases. A furniture store financing agreement for a large sum, likely for the trendy apartment Chloe had just moved into. A personal loan for home improvements, coinciding perfectly with her recent extravagant vacation photos on social media. In total, nearly $35,000 of debt. Debt that wasn't mine. Debt that I was, apparently, legally responsible for. Grandma Margaret, I said, my voice cracking, the raw emotion finally breaking through the numbness. I think Chloe has been stealing my identity. For months, maybe even longer. Grandma Margaret's face had gone utterly pale, her complexion ashen. Without a word, her hand still trembling slightly, reached for the antique desk phone. She pressed a single button, a direct line to the house intercom. Send Chloe to my study immediately, she commanded, her tone sharp, authoritative, brooking no argument. While we waited, the air thick with unspoken accusations and mounting fear, I continued my frantic investigation. I pulled up my full credit report, watching in horror as my once excellent score, meticulously built over years of responsible financial habits, had plummeted nearly 100 points. High utilization rates on multiple credit cards, multiple hard inquiries for loans I never requested. It was all there, a testament to systematic financial destruction. Then I checked my email, specifically the trash folder. And there they were, dozens of deleted confirmation emails for accounts I never opened, notifications about credit limit increases, statements from unfamiliar lenders. Chloe hadn't just accessed my personal information. She had accessed my email, systematically erasing evidence of her fraud, covering her tracks with a cold, calculated precision. She was not only a thief, but a meticulous one. The heavy oak door to the study swung open then, revealing Chloe. Her makeup was smeared from crying, leaving dark streaks down her face, but her expression, to my shock, was defiant rather than remorseful. Her eyes, usually so bright and charming, were narrowed, hardened. Sit down, Grandma Margaret ordered, her voice like steel, pointing to the chair beside me. Chloe complied, her movements stiff, her gaze fixed on the ornate rug beneath her feet. She refused to look in my direction. Explain, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage and betrayal boiling inside me. I turned my phone screen towards her, displaying the damning list of fraudulent accounts, the bright crimson car loan, the maxed-out credit cards, the personal loan. It's not what it looks like, Chloe began, her voice taking on the whiny, wheeling tone she'd used since childhood, the one she deployed whenever she wanted to charm her way out of trouble. It was a sound I knew intimately, a sound that now filled me with utter revulsion. Really, I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. Because it looks exactly like identity theft, and fraud, and forgery, on a massive scale. I was going to pay it all back, she protested, her voice rising in pitch. You have such good credit, Sarah, and mine was terrible after I missed some payments last year. The car was supposed to be temporary, just until I fixed my credit score. Then I'd refinance it in my name, and you'd never even know. Never know, I repeated, incredulity lacing my words, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. Chloe, there's $35,000 of debt in my name. How could I never know? It's not that much, she muttered, looking down at her hands, fidgeting with the crumpled tissue. The audacity. the sheer, unadulterated gall. Grandma Margaret, who had been silently observing, her face a mask of escalating horror, finally spoke. Her voice was low, trembling with suppressed fury. "Chloe Elizabeth Miller, are you telling me you committed fraud? Using your sister's personal information? Her identity?" Chloe's eyes filled with tears again, but they seemed more like tears of self-pity than remorse. "You don't understand how hard it's been for me," she wailed, suddenly launching into a familiar lament. "Sarah has everything figured out. Great job, perfect credit. Everyone thinks she's so responsible. I just needed a little help to get started." "Help?" I echoed, my voice practically a shout now, raw with years of suppressed frustration and the crushing weight of this fresh betrayal. "You call ruining my credit help? I've worked night shifts for 6 years to build that credit. I took the bus to work for a month because my car died while you were driving around in a brand new Summit Ascent SUV that I'm apparently paying for." "Grandma Margaret was paying for it." Chloe shot back, as if that singular fact somehow absolved her of everything, as if it made the identity theft disappear. I turned to Grandma Margaret, my gaze piercing. "Did you know, Grandma? When you gave her money for the down payment, did you know she was using my name for the loan? Did you know any of this?" Grandma Margaret looked stricken, as if I had physically slapped her. "Absolutely not," she said, her voice hoarse, her eyes wide with shock. "Chloe told me she was approved for financing based on her new job. I gave her the down payment as a graduation gift. Late, I know, but I wanted to help her establish independence." She fixed Chloe with a hard, unwavering stare, her voice gaining a dangerous edge. "I had no idea she was establishing it by stealing from her sister." Chloe began sobbing in earnest now, real, gut-wrenching sobs. "I was going to fix everything. The new job pays really well, and I've been making all the payments for 1 month." "For 1 month?" I pointed out coldly, my voice devoid of any warmth. "What about the credit cards, the furniture loan, the personal loan for your Cancun trip 3 years ago? Were you making those payments too?" Her silence was answer enough. It stretched between us, thick and heavy, punctuated only by her ragged sobs. The truth, ugly and undeniable, lay exposed. I stood up, unable to sit beside her any longer, unable to breathe the same air. "I need to go," I said, the words a raw whisper. "I need to figure out how to undo all of this, how to reclaim my life." "Wait," Grandma Margaret said, her voice unusually soft, almost pleading. She reached into a deep drawer in her desk, her hand rummaging for a moment. Then she pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder, older and more substantial than any I'd seen her handle. She placed it carefully on the desk between us. "There's more. You need to see this." As Chloe's wide, tear-filled eyes fixated on the folder, a dawning recognition flashing across her face, I realized with a chilling certainty that the night's revelations were far, far from over. In fact, they were just beginning. The leather-bound folder sat between us on Grandma Margaret's immense desk, like a ticking time bomb, waiting to detonate and unleash even more devastation. Grandma Margaret's weathered hands rested on top of it, and I noticed for the first time that they were trembling slightly. A subtle tremor, but unmistakable. I'd never seen her tremble. My indomitable grandmother, always so certain, so commanding, so in control, suddenly looked every one of her 80 years. The weight of the moment seemed to press down on her, bending her usually ramrod-straight posture. "I need you both to understand something," she began, her voice uncharacteristically quiet, laced with a profound sadness. "This folder contains information I've been gathering for the past several months. Information I didn't want to believe. Information that, frankly, made me sick to my stomach. Which is why I waited. Perhaps that," she added, looking directly at me, her eyes filled with a deep regret, "was a mistake. A grave mistake." She opened the folder slowly, deliberately, the crackle of old paper filling the suffocating silence. She withdrew a stack of bank statements, their official letterhead stark against the polished wood, and spread them across the desk. I recognized the distinct letterhead of Pacific Shores Bank, where our family had banked for generations. "Chloe," she said, her voice gaining a slow, deliberate strength, her gaze fixed on my sister. "These are the records from the account I set up for you when you graduated college. I deposited $25,000 into it, as your start in life. The same amount, Sarah, that I gave to you when you finished nursing school." My head snapped up. What? I gasped, the single word torn from my throat. I never received any money from you after graduation, Grandma Margaret. Not a dime. I had to take out more loans. Grandma Margaret's expression darkened, her lips thinning further. That's the first discrepancy I noticed, she said, her voice now hard, resolute. She slid a single document toward me. It was a copy of a cashier's check, made out to Sarah Miller for $25,000, dated 6 years ago, precisely when I'd finished nursing school. And on the endorsement line, clear as day, was a signature, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature, it was close, disturbingly close. The strokes were formed differently, a subtle hesitation here, a slightly more flamboyant flourish there, and the capital S in Sarah had a small, unnecessary loop that I never ever used. It was a forgery, a meticulous, cruel forgery. I didn't sign this, I whispered, staring at the perfectly mimicked, yet subtly wrong, endorsement. My voice was hollow, devoid of emotion, as if the sheer shock had leached it away. I never received this money, not this check, not any money. Chloe had gone completely still beside me. Her ragged sobbing had abruptly silenced. Her head was bowed, her shoulders rigid. She was trapped, cornered, exposed. Grandma Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength now, an unstoppable force of truth. When Sarah mentioned her financial struggles last Christmas, her crippling student debt, her desperate need for a new car, I was confused, deeply confused. The money I'd given her should have eliminated most, if not all, of her initial student debt. It should have provided a solid foundation, so I began investigating, quietly. I had my suspicions, but I needed proof. She produced more documents, sliding them across the desk one by one, each a fresh stab to my heart. Credit card statements in my name, with charges for designer clothes I'd never seen. Lavish vacations to tropical resorts I'd only ever dreamed of. Withdrawal slips from my savings account, clearly not authorized by me, for large sums. Loan applications with my meticulously forged signature, for purposes I knew nothing about. The pattern, sickeningly clear, began to emerge. A systematic, long-term pattern of theft. It appears, Sarah, Grandma Margaret said, her voice tight with a devastating combination of grief and anger, that Chloe has been systematically diverting funds intended for you, and accessing your accounts, and opening new lines of credit in your name for nearly 6 years. The room tilted around me. 6 years, since the very beginning of my nursing career. Every extra night shift I'd worked, the ones that blurred into a permanent haze of exhaustion. Every vacation I'd skipped, saving every dollar, every penny, every discount grocery store I'd shopped at, meticulously tracking every expense, every budget line. All while Chloe, my own sister, was siphoning away thousands of dollars, tens of thousands. Money that should have been mine. Money that should have freed me from the crushing weight of debt. Money that should have given me a genuine head start in life. How much? I asked, my voice a hollow whisper, devoid of inflection, as if someone else were speaking. Grandma Margaret consulted a handwritten summary, her eyes scanning the neat columns of figures. By my calculations, she said, her voice flat, approximately $95,000 over these 6 years. The number hit me like a physical blow, $95,000. It would have paid off my student loans completely. It would have bought me not just a reliable car, but a brand new one, outright. It would have meant financial security, a cushion, a future, instead of a constant grinding struggle. Instead of taking the bus, living paycheck to paycheck, battling against a mountain of debt. Chloe, I turned to my sister, who was now staring fixedly at the expensive rug beneath her feet. Her face still streaked with tears, but her expression hardening, becoming something I barely recognized. How could you do this? When she finally looked up, I was shocked to see not remorse, not shame, but a deep, festering resentment in her eyes. It was a look that curdled my stomach. It's always been so easy for you, she spat. Her voice laced with venom, the whiny tone gone, replaced by bitter accusation. Perfect grades, perfect career, everyone's favorite nurse, saving lives while I was just the pretty, dumb sister selling houses for commission. You didn't need the money like I did. You didn't appreciate it. Didn't need it, I repeated incredulously. The anger, the sheer burning fury, finally breaking through the numbness. I've been drowning in debt, working myself to exhaustion, while you've been living off money stolen from me, money that was mine. You never noticed, she retorted, as if that fact, my trusting nature, somehow justified everything. You were so busy with your important career, you never even checked your accounts properly. If Grandma Margaret hadn't stuck her nose in, you'd still be none the wiser. That's enough, Grandma Margaret slammed her hand on the desk, the loud crack making us both jump, the sudden noise echoing in the tense silence of the study. Her face was flushed, her eyes blazing with a righteous anger I'd never seen directed at Chloe before. Chloe, what you've done isn't just immoral, it's criminal. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. These are serious offenses. Chloe scoffed, a dry, bitter sound, and finally looked at me, a flicker of something close to triumph in her eyes. You wouldn't press charges against your own sister. The sad truth was, a part of me knew she was probably right. Despite everything, despite the years of deceit, despite the crushing betrayal, some deeply ingrained part of me still remembered the little girl who'd crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, terrified of the lightning. The little sister I'd protected, played with, tried to guide. But that little girl was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. Someone cold, calculating, and utterly unrepentant. I need to leave, I said abruptly, standing up again, the walls of the study feeling like they were closing in on me, suffocating me. I can't. I need to process this, all of this. Grandma Margaret nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes, mixed with a profound sadness. Take these, she said, gathering the stack of damning documents, and carefully placing them back into the leather-bound folder. She pushed it across the desk toward me. You'll need them to dispute the fraudulent accounts, to reclaim your identity. As I took the folder, the weight of it in my hands heavy, another question occurred to me. A question that had been lurking at the edge of my mind, overshadowed by the more immediate horror. Grandma Margaret, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, how did you get all these records? Some of these are from my personal accounts, my bank accounts. A faint blush colored her already pale cheeks. Her gaze flickered away for a moment, an uncharacteristic sign of discomfort. I may have implied to certain bank managers that I had your express permission, she admitted. Her voice a little lower now. Being the town matriarch has its advantages. I'm sorry for the invasion of privacy, Sarah, but I needed to know the truth, for both our sakes, before it was too late. So Grandma Margaret had invaded my privacy too, albeit with infinitely better intentions than Chloe, but an invasion nonetheless. The betrayal felt multi-layered, a complex tapestry of deceit and well-meaning but unauthorized intrusion. My sister's deliberate, systematic theft, my grandmother's well-meaning but overstepping investigation, and the entire family's years of obliviousness, of simply not seeing or choosing not to see the glaring disparities right in front of them. I walked out of the study without another word, the heavy leather folder clutched to my chest like a shield, or perhaps a burden. I passed through the living room where the rest of the family still waited anxiously, their hushed conversations ceasing entirely as I appeared. Their gazes were filled with a mixture of fear, concern, and desperate curiosity. Sarah dear, my mother, Mom Catherine began, rising slowly from the sofa, her hands clasped together, her face etched with worry. What's happening? What did she do? I couldn't answer. How could I explain? How could I articulate in a few simple words that the daughter they thought they knew, the free spirit they'd always doted on, had been systematically stealing from her sister for years? That their cherished family narrative of one responsible daughter and one spontaneous one was built on a foundation of cruel, calculated fraud? Ask Chloe, I managed, my voice strained, devoid of emotion, already heading for the front door. Or Grandma Margaret, I can't, not right now. I drove home in silence, the folder on the passenger seat beside me like an unwelcome companion, a constant, heavy presence. The world outside my windshield seemed surreal, distorted. People were going about their normal evening activities, walking dogs, jogging, laughing on their porches, blissfully unaware that my entire life had just imploded. By the time I reached my small apartment, my initial shock had hardened into something colder, something more resolute. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about years of deception, about a relationship, a sisterly bond built on lies. As I spread the documents across my kitchen table and began making notes, organizing the chaos, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Things could never, ever go back to how they were before. Not after this. At 2 in the morning, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. A sudden blinding burst of light in the quiet darkness of my apartment. I hadn't slept. How could I? Instead, I'd spent hours at my kitchen table, meticulously organizing Grandma Margaret's documents chronologically. I was creating a spreadsheet of unauthorized transactions, cross-referencing dates, and desperately researching identity theft recovery steps online. The more I discovered, the worse it became. Chloe hadn't just stolen the $25,000 graduation gift. She'd opened credit cards in my name while I was still in nursing school. She'd diverted mail, intercepted tax refunds, and even taken out a personal loan for emergency medical expenses. That coincided perfectly with her lavish trip to Cancun 3 years ago. The brazenness, the sheer scope of it was sickening. My phone had been mercifully silent until now, allowing me to work through the evidence undisturbed, to channel my churning emotions into methodical action. But suddenly, it erupted with notifications, a cascade of text messages, voicemails, and app alerts from nearly every member of my family. Mom, Catherine. Sarah, please call us. We're worried sick about you, Dad. Robert, your mother is in tears. Whatever happened, we can fix this as a family. Aunt Susan. Just heard what happened. Absolutely disgraceful. Call if you need anything, Uncle David. Let me know if you need a lawyer. My golf buddy Phil specializes in this stuff. Cousin Emily. Don't do anything until we talk. I can help navigate the legal aspects. And then, most surprising of all, a message from Grandma Margaret. I've made arrangements for Chloe to return everything. Come by the house tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m. Bring the folder. The only person who hadn't messaged was Chloe. I set the phone down, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of family concern. Where had all this support been when I was working double shifts, sacrificing my youth to make loan payments? Where was it when I'd mentioned taking the bus to work because my car had finally died? The family's sudden dramatic interest felt too little, too late. Still, I found myself typing a response to Emily. She was a paralegal, not a criminal lawyer, but she'd understand the legal system better than I did. She'd be a pragmatic voice in a swirling storm of emotion. Me, still awake if you want to call. My phone rang within seconds. You should be sleeping, Sarah, Emily said by way of greeting, her voice a warm, familiar balm. So should you, I retorted, a faint, humorless smile touching my lips. She paused, sensing the gravity in my voice. How bad is it? I glanced at my spreadsheet, the numbers staring back at me like accusatory eyes. $95,000 in change, by my calculation. Plus the credit damage, my score tanked. Emily whistled low, a sound of genuine shock. And it's definitely Chloe, without question? She admitted it, Em, right in front of Grandma Margaret. She seemed more annoyed at being caught than sorry for what she did. That tracks, Emily muttered, a grim acceptance in her tone. Listen, Sarah, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you planning to press charges? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and inescapable. I'd been avoiding it all night, focusing instead on the practical steps of recovery. The logistics of disputing fraudulent claims, but now it was unavoidable. I don't know, I admitted finally, the words a strained whisper. Part of me thinks she absolutely deserves it. Everything she gets, but another part remembers she's my sister. The sister who stole nearly $100,000 from you, Sarah, Emily reminded me gently, but firmly. Yeah, I rubbed my eyes, fatigue finally catching up to me, a dull ache throbbing behind my temples. What would happen if I did press charges? Emily shifted into lawyer mode, her voice becoming crisp and professional, detached from the emotional turmoil. Identity theft across this dollar amount is a felony, Sarah. She could face substantial fines and potentially significant prison time. Best case scenario for her, if a prosecutor were lenient, would be probation, restitution payments, and a permanent criminal record. It would follow her for life. The thought of Chloe, my sister, in prison made my stomach twist. A sickening churn of conflicting emotions. Despite everything, that image was jarring. And if I don't press charges? Then she faces no direct legal consequences from the state, Emily explained, her voice carefully neutral. You can still dispute the fraudulent accounts, of course, but recovery becomes significantly more complicated without a police report, without that official weight behind your claims. And, Emily added carefully, her voice dropping slightly, She could potentially do this to someone else in the future. If there are no consequences now, what's to stop her from repeating the behavior? That thought hadn't occurred to me, and it sent a cold shiver down my spine. If Chloe was capable of systematically defrauding her own sister for years, with such cold calculation, what would stop her from targeting others? Friends? Colleagues? The very thought was chilling. Grandma Margaret messaged that she's arranged for Chloe to return everything, I said, relaying the message. Does that make a difference legally? Not really, Sarah. The crimes were still committed, the fraud still happened. But it might factor into sentencing if you did pursue charges, as a sign of remorse or an attempt at making amends. Emily paused. What does return everything even mean, though? She spent most of the money, hasn't she? I assume Grandma Margaret is paying me back, I said. The realization dawning on me even as I spoke the words. She feels responsible somehow. She did give Chloe access to family finances, Emily pointed out, her voice softening slightly. And she didn't notice the pattern for years, despite being the family matriarch who supposedly kept meticulous track of everyone's business. It's a complex situation, Sarah. We talked for another hour, discussing practical steps. Emily advised freezing my credit immediately with all 3 major credit bureaus, filing formal disputes with each creditor, and meticulously gathering all the evidence for a potential police report. She offered, without hesitation, to accompany me to Grandma Margaret's house in the morning, to be a supportive presence, a legal mind in a room full of emotional family members. After we hung up, I sat in my dark kitchen, staring at the scattered documents that represented years of systematic betrayal. The hurt and anger remained, burning hot and raw, but now they were joined by something else, a cold, clear determination. Whatever happened next, whatever decision I made, I wouldn't be a passive victim in my own life anymore. I wouldn't be the quiet, dependable Sarah who simply accepted whatever crumbs were thrown her way. I spent the next hour implementing Emily's advice, freezing my credit, changing all my passwords, drafting preliminary dispute letters to the banks and credit card companies. As I worked, more messages arrived from family members, ranging from genuinely supportive to infuriatingly accusatory. Cousin Mark, heard you're trying to get Chloe arrested. Bit extreme, don't you think? Family needs to stick together. Aunt Susan's husband. Family matters should stay in the family, Sarah. Lawyers just make everything worse. These messages stung, of course they did. They hinted at the underlying pressure, the expectation of silence, of forgiveness for the sake of family harmony. But surprisingly, they also strengthened my resolve. The family dynamics were becoming clearer than they'd ever been. Some would prioritize peace over justice, expecting me to forgive and forget for the sake of appearing a good daughter, a good sister. They wanted the problem to disappear quietly, to be swept under the rug, not for Chloe to face real consequences, or for me to receive real, tangible restitution. Around 4 a.m, exhaustion finally won out. My body ached, my mind swam. I gathered the documents back into the folder, placing it carefully on my nightstand, and collapsed into bed, setting my alarm for 8. As I drifted toward an uneasy, restless sleep, one thought circled relentlessly in my mind. Whatever decision I made in the coming days, it would permanently alter my relationship with my family. The Sarah who had quietly sought approval and acceptance, who had yearned for recognition, was gone, replaced by someone who now understood the true value of standing up for herself, of honoring her own truth, whatever the cost. Emily picked me up at 9:30 the next morning, looking surprisingly professional in a crisp blazer and tailored trousers, despite the early hour and weekend timing. I, on the other hand, had managed only to throw on jeans and a clean t-shirt, my hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Sleep had been elusive, a cruel mirage, and the little I'd gotten had been plagued by vivid, unsettling dreams of falling, endlessly falling, and being unable to catch myself. "You look terrible," Emily observed bluntly, but gently, as I climbed into her car, the leather-bound folder clutched to my chest. "Thanks," I mumbled, offering a weak, humorless smile. That's exactly what I needed to hear right now. She smiled apologetically. "Sorry, just concerned. Did you sleep at all?" "Maybe 2 hours," I admitted, rubbing my tired eyes. "I kept thinking about what you said, about Chloe potentially doing this to someone else if there are no consequences." Emily nodded, pulling away from my apartment building, heading towards Grandma Margaret's estate. It's a valid concern, Sarah. Financial crimes often escalate when unpunished. The patterns don't just disappear. The drive to Grandma Margaret's house was short, but the tension in the car was palpable, thick and heavy. I decided then and there that I wouldn't make any final decisions about pressing charges until I'd heard what Grandma Margaret and Chloe had to say. But I'd prepared. I'd gone over my questions, my talking points, all based on Emily's pragmatic advice. Whatever happened, I wouldn't be manipulated or guilt-tripped into a resolution that left me holding the bag for Chloe's egregious crimes. Not again. Grandma Margaret's house looked different in the harsh morning light, less like the magical, sun-drenched setting of my childhood memories, and more like what it actually was, an aging farmhouse with peeling paint and slightly sagging gutters. The remnants of yesterday's disastrous barbecue had been meticulously cleaned up. The tables and chairs returned to storage. The lingering scent of charcoal vanished. It was as if Grandma Margaret was trying desperately to erase all evidence of the calamitous gathering. Several cars were already parked in the gravel driveway. My parents' sedan, Chloe's bright crimson Summit Ascent SUV, and an unfamiliar black sedan with a discreet Pinnacle Wealth Management logo on the door. Grandma Margaret's called in reinforcements, Emily murmured, a wry note in her voice, as we approached the imposing front door. Before we could even knock, the door swung open. Grandma Margaret stood there, her usual imposing presence somewhat diminished by the clear signs of a sleepless night mirroring my own. Her eyes were shadowed, her shoulders slumped ever so slightly. "You brought Emily," she observed, her voice flat, not sounding particularly surprised. "That's probably wise." "She's here as my cousin, Grandma Margaret, not my lawyer," I clarified, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Emily gave me a small, reassuring squeeze on the arm. Grandma Margaret nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, and stepped aside to let us enter. "Everyone's in the dining room." "Everyone?" I tensed, my stomach clenching. "Grandma Margaret, I'm not ready for a full family intervention." "Not everyone," she amended, sensing my distress. "Your parents, Chloe, and Mr. David Chen from Pinnacle Wealth Management. He's helping sort out the mess." I followed her through the house, Emily close behind me. The dining room table, the same one where countless family holidays, birthdays, and triumphs had been celebrated, was now covered with documents, open laptops, and calculators. It looked less like a place for celebration and more like a war room. My parents sat on one side, both looking utterly shell-shocked, their faces pale and drawn. Chloe was at the far end of the table, her eyes downcast, her face blotchy from crying. A crumpled tissue clutched tightly in her hand. Across from my parents sat a middle-aged man in a crisp, dark suit. He rose politely when we entered. "Sarah," he said, extending his hand, his voice calm and professional. "David Chen, your grandmother asked me to help facilitate this situation." I shook his hand automatically, my mind still trying to take in the scene, the new player in this family drama. "What exactly is this situation?" "Please sit down," Grandma Margaret directed, taking her place at the head of the table, her voice regaining some of its old authority. "Mr. Chen has helped me develop a comprehensive plan to address everything." I sat cautiously, placing the heavy folder in front of me, its contents a silent testament to the night's revelations. Emily took the seat beside me, her quiet, steady presence bolstering my courage. "Before we begin," I said, making eye contact with each person at the table, my voice clear and steady, surprising even myself. "I want to be clear that I haven't decided whether to file a police report. I'm here to listen, to understand what's being proposed. But I'm not committing to anything yet." My mother made a small, distressed sound, a soft whimper. Dad Robert immediately placed his hand over hers, a silent gesture of comfort. Chloe continued staring at the table, a rigid statue of misery. Grandma Margaret nodded briskly. "Understood, Sarah. Mr. Chen, please explain the plan." The financial advisor opened a sleek leather portfolio. "Based on the documentation provided by your grandmother," he began, his voice calm and measured, "and our analysis conducted overnight, we've confirmed unauthorized transactions totaling approximately $98,000 over a 6-year period. The figure was even higher than my calculations, which frankly made my stomach turn again. Additionally, there's the matter of credit damage, which is substantial, and potential tax implications, as some of the diverted funds were reported on your tax returns, creating further complications." He slid a document across the table to me. "This, Miss Miller, is a proposed restitution agreement. Chloe acknowledges the full amount owed and agrees to repay it according to the following terms. I scanned the document, Emily reading over my shoulder, her eyes quickly taking in the legalese. It outlined a payment plan spanning 5 years, with monthly installments of $1,600, directly deposited to a new, secure account in my name. Additionally, Chloe would surrender the new Summit Ascent SUV, which would be immediately sold, with the proceeds applied directly to the debt. Most surprisingly, the agreement included a confession statement, detailed enough to serve as undisputed evidence if I did decide to pursue legal action. It was meticulously drafted, leaving no room for ambiguity. "This is comprehensive," Emily remarked, a note of clear, if grudging, impressiveness in her voice. "More thorough than I anticipated." "There's more," Grandma Margaret said, her voice steady, her gaze fixed on me. "Turn to page 3. I flipped to the indicated page, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and curiosity. And there, on the page, I found myself looking at a deed transfer. A deed from Grandma Margaret to me. She was signing over one of her multifamily properties, the small triplex on Elm Street, a solid income-generating building in the heart of Pine Ridge. I don't understand," I said, looking up at her, my voice barely a whisper. My mind reeled. "I failed you, Sarah," Grandma Margaret said simply, her eyes, though tired, clear and direct. "I gave Chloe preferential treatment for years. I didn't recognize what was happening right under my nose, because I was so focused on making sure Chloe found her footing, and for that, I bear a profound responsibility." She gestured to the document. "The property generates about $2,000 monthly in rental income. It's worth approximately $350,000. I'm transferring it to you, effective immediately. Mr. Chen has ensured all the legalities are in process." The room fell silent as I processed this. The property, steady income, significant equity, far, far more than the stolen amount. A foundation, truly, that I could only have dreamed of. "Grandma Margaret, I can't accept this," I began, my voice thick with emotion, a mix of gratitude and overwhelming disbelief. "You can and you will," she interrupted firmly, her voice regaining a bit of its old steel. "It's not just about the money Chloe took, Sarah. It's about the years of inequality. The scholarship I gave her, but not you. The vehicle down payments, the rent I covered while she found her footing. You worked twice as hard for half the support, half the recognition, and that stops today. This is my attempt to balance a ledger that has been terribly skewed for too long." Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and insistent, but I blinked them back fiercely. This wasn't the time for emotional reactions. This was a negotiation, a legal proceeding, a rebalancing of power. "And what does Chloe have to say about all this?" I asked, finally looking directly at my sister, whose head remained bowed. Chloe slowly raised her head. Her face was blotchy, still tear-stained, but her eyes, though red-rimmed, held a glimmer of something I hadn't seen before, a fragile vulnerability. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice raw, barely audible. "I know that's not enough. I know it sounds hollow, but I truly am." She paused, wiping her eyes with the crumpled tissue. "It started small, Sarah, just the graduation money, because I was in trouble with some credit cards, and I panicked. Then, it got easier, each time. It just became a pattern, a way to solve my problems, a way to keep up appearances." She took a ragged breath. "I've signed everything, the confession, the payment plan. I'm moving back home with Mom and Dad, as we discussed, to save every single penny for the payments, to make this right." "You stole from me for 6 years," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, devoid of the tremor it had held just hours before. "You watched me struggle financially, work overtime, skip vacations, all while you were living off money that should have been mine. Money I earned, money I desperately needed, and you're sorry now because you got caught." "Sarah, dear," my mother, Mom Catherine, interjected, her voice pleading, her hand reaching out for mine across the table. "She's still your sister." "Mom, not now," I said sharply, pulling my hand away. The words came out harsher than I intended, but they were necessary. This isn't about family loyalty right now. This is about theft and fraud on a massive scale. "Your mother's right that Chloe is still your sister," Grandma Margaret said carefully, her gaze moving between us both, her voice finding its familiar, measured cadence. But you're right, Sarah, that this goes beyond a simple family dispute. That's precisely why I insisted on the confession statement. The choice to pursue legal action remains entirely yours, Sarah. No one here will pressure you. That is your decision alone. I looked at Mr. David Chen, the financial advisor. What happens to this agreement if I do file a police report? It remains valid, Miss Miller, he replied promptly, his voice calm and reassuring. It would likely be viewed favorably by prosecutors, certainly as an attempt at restitution and genuine remorse from Chloe. But it doesn't preclude criminal charges. The state can still pursue its case, irrespective of the civil agreement. I turned to Chloe again, her misery palpable. Do you understand that? That I could still press charges, even if I sign this agreement? She nodded miserably, her eyes welling up again. I know. Emily explained it when she helped Grandma Margaret draft the confession last night. I shot a surprised look at Emily, who simply shrugged, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. Grandma Margaret called me at midnight. I made sure the document would hold up legally either way. Always better to be prepared. For the next hour, we went through every single aspect of the agreement. Mr. Chen patiently explained how my credit would be restored through formal disputes, backed by Chloe's notarized confession. Grandma Margaret outlined the property transfer, the immediate steps she'd taken to freeze family accounts Chloe had access to, and how the rental income would be managed. My parents sat mostly silent, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but offering no defense of Chloe's actions. Their faces, though still pained, now held a newfound grim understanding of the depth of Chloe's deceit. Throughout it all, I maintained a detached, analytical approach, asking questions about tax implications, property management details, and enforcement mechanisms for the payment plan. Inside, however, a maelstrom of emotions churned. Hurt, betrayal, vindication, and beneath it all, a growing sense of power I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my life, the family dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the reliable daughter, the quiet sister, quietly accepting whatever scraps of attention came my way. I was the wronged party, being actively courted for forgiveness, for understanding, for a cessation of legal action. I was the one holding the cards. As Mr. Chen gathered the signed documents, Chloe finally spoke directly to me again, without prompting, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, she said softly, her gaze finally meeting mine, her eyes pleading. I know you hate me right now, and you have every right to, but please, believe me when I say, I never meant for it to go this far. I studied my sister, truly studied her, the designer clothes she wore, the perfectly manicured nails, the carefully styled hair, all financed, at least in part, with money stolen directly from me. The years of resentment, the unspoken competition, the inherent favoritism, it had all culminated in this moment. I don't hate you, Chloe, I replied truthfully, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. The words surprised even me. The white-hot rage had subsided, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. But I don't trust you either, and I don't know if I ever will again. As Emily and I prepared to leave, Grandma Margaret pulled me aside in the hallway, her hand resting gently on my arm. I meant what I said about failing you, Sarah, she said, her voice uncharacteristically humble, devoid of its usual matriarchal command. I favored Chloe because she reminded me of myself at that age, impulsive, social, struggling to find her way. You were always so capable, so responsible, so independent. I mistook your self-sufficiency for not needing support, for not needing me. That's a painful way to be punished for being reliable, I observed, my voice quiet but firm. Grandma Margaret nodded, genuine regret clear in her eyes. I know, and I can't undo those years, Sarah, but I can try to make it right. Going forward. As we drove away from the house, the June morning sun climbing higher in the sky, Emily glanced at me. So, what are you going to do about pressing charges? I gazed out the window, at the passing neighborhoods, the familiar streets of Pine Ridge. I considered the question that had kept me awake all night, the decision that had felt like the weight of the world on my shoulders. I don't know yet, I admitted. The answer's still not fully formed, but now, finally, truly my own. But for the first time, I feel like I'm the one making the decision. Not just reacting to what everyone else wants, not letting myself be pressured, and that perhaps was the most significant change of all. 1 month later, just 4 short weeks, And so much has changed. I stood in the driveway of my small apartment building, jingling a new set of car keys in my hand. The modest 2023 Subaru Forester gleamed in the summer sunshine, its practical, sensible lines a stark contrast to Chloe's flashy crimson SUV. It wasn't brand new or luxury branded, but it was reliable, practical, and most importantly, it was actually mine. I'd purchased it 2 days ago, after receiving the first substantial rental income payment from the Elm Street triplex. That feeling, the feeling of buying something with money that was truly mine, earned through my own perseverance and now, finally, reclaimed, it was indescribable. It felt like a deep, satisfying breath after holding it for years. The property transfer had been completed with surprising efficiency, thanks largely to Mr. David Chen's connections and Grandma Margaret's unexpected determination to expedite the process. The fraudulent accounts in my name had been closed, one by one, with the credit bureaus meticulously removing the negative marks after reviewing Chloe's notarized confession. It was a tedious process, but each success felt like a small victory. I'd opened new bank accounts at a completely different institution, implemented every security measure available: credit freezes, two-factor authentication, fraud alerts, a digital fortress around my financial life. Never again would I be so complacent, so trusting. But the biggest changes weren't financial. They were personal. They were etched deep within me, a profound shift in my own sense of self. The door to my building opened, and Emily emerged, carrying a cardboard box filled with donuts, my favorite kind, with sprinkles. She'd been my rock throughout the entire tumultuous aftermath, patiently helping me navigate dense legal documents, offering invaluable advice, and crucially, providing unwavering emotional support when the family pressure intensified. "Ready for your housewarming party?" she asked, her eyes twinkling mischievously as she nodded toward the new car with a smile. "Is it still a housewarming if it's for a car?" I quipped, laughing for the first time in what felt like ages. "Car warming doesn't have the same ring to it," she retorted, sliding into the passenger seat as I unlocked the doors. We were heading to Grandma Margaret's house, the first family gathering since the confrontation. I'd maintained limited contact with most relatives while focusing relentlessly on rebuilding my financial foundation, my sense of security. Some family members had reached out with genuine support, offering quiet empathy. Others, however, had pushed relentlessly for immediate reconciliation with Chloe, suggesting I was being vindictive or holding a grudge by keeping my distance. But through it all, I'd held firm to the boundaries I'd established. Yes, I'd signed the restitution agreement. No, I hadn't filed a police report, a decision I'd made after considerable, agonizing thought, weighing justice against the lifelong scars of a criminal record for my sister and the complexities of our family. But I'd also made it explicitly clear that rebuilding trust would take time, a lot of time, if it happened at all. As we drove, the familiar landscape of Pine Ridge passing by, Emily studied my expression, her gaze perceptive. "Nervous about seeing everyone?" "A little," I admitted honestly. "Especially Chloe." My sister had moved back in with our parents, just as planned. She'd surrendered the fraudulently obtained SUV, which had been sold quickly. She'd accepted a demotion at her real estate job, which came with reduced pay but more regular hours, supposedly to better manage her new financial obligations. And according to my mother, Chloe was now seeing a therapist, finally addressing her long-standing issues with impulse control and, crucially, entitlement. The first monthly payment, the $1,600, had arrived in my new account exactly as scheduled, a tangible, welcome sign of her commitment. But a check in the bank doesn't erase 6 years of calculated deception. "You know," Emily said carefully, breaking the silence, "nobody would blame you if you decided to keep your distance permanently, if you walked away." I considered this as we turned onto the familiar winding road leading to Grandma Margaret's sprawling farmhouse. The thought had crossed my mind more than once, the idea of a fresh start, untainted by the complex, often painful dynamics of my birth family. "I'm not ready to write her off completely," I confessed, the words surprising even myself. "We grew up together, Emily. There were good times too, moments I still cherish. She was my little sister." I paused, a deep sigh escaping my lips. "But I'm also not willing to pretend nothing happened, just to make family gatherings more comfortable, just to maintain the illusion of harmony." "That's fair," Emily nodded, a genuine smile now gracing her lips. "And pretty mature, all things considered. A new Sarah is emerging, I see. The farmhouse came into view, looking far more welcoming than it had during our last tumultuous visit. Fresh paint brightened the exterior, a soft, creamy white, and Grandma Margaret's summer garden was in full, glorious bloom, bursting with vibrant colors, a testament to her enduring strength and resilience. Several cars were already parked in the driveway, including my parents' sedan. Grandma Margaret met us at the door, her face lighting up when she spotted the donut box in Emily's hand. "Perfect. I made coffee," she declared, ushering us inside with a rare, genuine smile. Then she paused, studying me intently, her gaze piercing. "You look different, Sarah. Good different." "New haircut," I offered, touching the shoulder-length bob I'd splurged on at a proper salon. Rather than the discount place I'd used for years, it was a small change, but it felt symbolic. "It's not just that," Grandma Margaret shook her head slowly, her eyes still on me. "There's something else, a confidence, a quiet strength." She was right. The past month, despite its lingering pain, had transformed me in ways far beyond the superficial. Standing up for myself, refusing to be pressured into quick forgiveness, making decisions based on my needs, my truth, rather than others' expectations. These actions had awakened something within me that had been dormant for far too long, a core of self-worth that no external validation, no family favoritism could ever diminish. The gathering was smaller than the ill-fated barbecue, just my immediate family, my parents, Emily and Arthur, and Chloe. Chloe was already seated in the living room when we entered, her usual designer outfit replaced by simple jeans and a plain blouse. She looked up as I walked in, anxiety clear in her expression, her eyes dark and shadowed. "Hi," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "Hi," I replied, taking a seat across from her rather than beside her, a small but significant boundary. Conversation was awkward at first, stiff and stilted. Everyone carefully avoided any direct mention of the situation that had brought us to this uncomfortable point. Mom Catherine talked about her students' end-of-year projects. Dad Robert described problems with a new construction site. Arthur dozed intermittently in his favorite armchair. Normal family stuff, carefully constructed, designed to maintain a fragile peace, except for the constant thrumming undercurrent of tension. The elephant in the room was not just an elephant. It was a herd of elephants doing the can-can. After lunch, Grandma Margaret surprised everyone by announcing she had something else to share. She disappeared into her study, returning a moment later with a large, leather-bound photo album, one I'd never seen before. "I've been thinking a lot about family legacies," she began, her voice soft but resonant, opening the album on the coffee table. "About what we pass down, besides money or property, or even debt." Inside were photos I'd never seen. Pictures of Grandma Margaret as a young woman, looking remarkably like Chloe, standing beside a severe-looking older woman. "This was my mother," Grandma Margaret explained, her voice tinged with a complex mix of reverence and resentment. "Your great-grandmother, she was difficult, played favorites with her children, used money to control us all. It was her way. It was how she was raised, I suppose." She turned a page, revealing more vintage photos, snapshots of a bygone era. "I swore I'd never be like her. I tried, Sarah, I truly did. But patterns repeat. Unconscious patterns, unless we consciously, deliberately, break them." She looked directly at Chloe, her gaze firm, then at me, her eyes filled with a deep, knowing sadness. I inadvertently created an environment where one grandchild felt entitled to take whatever she wanted, and another felt she had to earn every single scrap of recognition, every bit of support. That's my responsibility to bear, and I am bearing it. "Grandma Margaret," I began, feeling a surge of discomfort at her public self-recrimination. It was raw, honest, but still deeply uncomfortable. She held up a hand, stopping me. "Let me finish, dear. What happened between you two didn't happen in a vacuum. There were underlying dynamics, but," she added, fixing Chloe with a stern, unwavering look, a return of her old steel. "Understanding causes doesn't excuse choices. Chloe, you alone are responsible for the decisions you made. Your actions were yours, and yours alone." Chloe nodded, tears forming in her eyes again, but this time they seemed different. Less self-pitying, more contrite. "I know," she whispered. "And I'm trying to make amends. Truly, This past month has been a wake-up call. She turned to me, her voice trembling slightly. I started reading about identity theft victims, Sarah, their stories. I never thought about how it affects people long-term, not just financially, but emotionally. The violation of trust, the feeling that your identity isn't fully yours anymore, that someone else has worn your skin. She swallowed hard, her gaze unwavering. I did that to my own sister, and I am so truly sorry for the pain I caused. It was the first time she'd acknowledged the profound emotional impact of her actions, not just the cold, hard financial cost. It was a small step, but it was significant. It was a sign of genuine understanding, not just forced compliance. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly, the words feeling weighty, meaningful. "It helps, more than you know." Later, as everyone moved to the patio for coffee and dessert, Grandma Margaret pulled me aside again, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I have something else for you," she said, pressing a thick envelope into my hand. Inside was a set of keys, different from the ones to the Elm Street triplex. These were older, heavier, with a rustic, tarnished keychain. "What are these for?" I asked, confused. "The cabin by Crescent Lake," she replied, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "Arthur and I don't use it much anymore. Too many stairs for us now. The deed transfer is already in process. Mr. Chen handled it last week." I stared at her in shock. The family cabin by Crescent Lake. It was a beloved retreat, a place of quiet solitude, nestled deep in the pine trees, overlooking a pristine, clear lake. It was worth at least $500,000. My breath hitched. "Grandma Margaret," I whispered, utterly overwhelmed. "This is too much. The triplex was already more than enough." "It's not about balancing the ledger, Sarah," she said firmly, her eyes holding mine, a deep, unwavering affection in their depths. "It's about acknowledging your worth. For too long, I measured success by Chloe's standards, social connections, outward appearance, effortless charm, and I failed to value your kind of success. Your hard work, your quiet integrity, your steadfast persistence, your deep compassion. You are the rock of this family, Sarah, more than any of us realized." She squeezed my hand, a warm, comforting pressure. "Consider it an investment in the family member who's most like my father, the best man I ever knew." Driving home that evening, the windows down, the warm summer air rushing through the car, I felt a profound, deep sense of peace settling over me. The past month had been painful, revealing ugly truths about my family, forcing difficult decisions, and pushing me to my absolute limits. But from that pain, from that shattering, had emerged something valuable. A stronger sense of self-worth, clearer boundaries, and the unwavering knowledge that I could advocate for myself effectively, even against the people I loved most. I hadn't fully forgiven Chloe yet. That would take time, a lot of time, and consistent, undeniable evidence of changed behavior. But I'd chosen not to let her betrayal define me. I'd chosen not to let it poison my other relationships, or the quiet joy I found in my life. I'd found my voice, and I'd used it to demand the respect I deserved, the restitution I was owed, the acknowledgement of my worth. As for the future, for the first time in my adult life, it looked genuinely bright. The property income from the Elm Street triplex would allow me to pay off my remaining student loans within a year, completely. I could take vacation time without financial stress, without the constant guilt of lost wages. I could even consider switching to day shifts at Evergreen Community Hospital, something I'd wanted for years but couldn't afford due to the night differential pay. More importantly, I discovered a resilience within myself that no betrayal could break, and no external validation could replace. The hardest lesson of this entire ordeal had become the most valuable. True self-worth comes not from family approval or financial security bestowed by others, but from honoring your own boundaries, speaking your truth, and standing firmly in who you are, regardless of the cost. So tell me, have you ever had to stand up to family members who took advantage of your kindness, your generosity, or your trust? How did you navigate those impossible conversations? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. This journey has taught me that speaking your truth, even when it's difficult, is the first step toward healing. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you strength, please like this video and hit that subscribe button for more real-life experiences, lessons learned, and paths to self-discovery. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to advocate for yourself when needed.